Hello, my name is Safradio Salmon Mujage from Edukea Tanzania. I'm a history teacher, so welcome in this session to proceed with our topic, which is nationalism and the decolonization. It is the just second topic in Form 4. So on the last session we ended on the factors for the rise of African nationalism, and we saw the two crises or categories of factors, which were internal factors for the rise of African nationalism and the external factors for the rise of nationalism. And we mentioned a lot, and I explained about those all factors, internal and external factors. So today let us go to look on the nationalistic struggles, how it was changed from the resistance or war or resistance and to the formation of social welfare and association. It means that from 1919 to 1914, the 1914s, nationalistic struggle changed from wars of resistance to formation of social welfare and association. It means that from that year, from the end of the Second World War up to the end of from the end of First World War up to the end of the Second World War, the nationalistic struggle was changed from the resistance or wars to the formation of social welfare and the social welfare associations, social welfare and associations. So we can see that there are the forms for nationalistic struggles. So let us see the social welfare and the associations by definition. These were groups which were formed by Africans who were working on different sectors of colonial economy, such as agriculture and industries, etc. It means that these were groups which were formed by the group of Africans, or by the Africans who were working in the colonial economy projects like agriculture and industries and etc. So this is the definition of social welfare and the associations. Mean that was a group, or were the group of people who were working were a group of African people who were working in different colonial economy projects or economic activities such as industries, mining centers, agriculture and others. So in order to come up with their demands. The reasons for the rise of social welfare and the associations. The reasons which triggered for the rise of social welfare and the associations. It means that they are formed those social welfare and association to remove the colonial exploitation. It means that after the Second World War, the colonialists intensified African exploitation. So the Europeans were intensifying the exploitation of African resources and the African labor. So the aim of those social welfare and associations was to remove this colonial exploitation that was done by the colonialists. Another reason was colonial discrimination. It means that the colonial masters were discriminative and segregative in nature, specifically in the provision of social services like education, health services, transport and communication services. So the Africans were segregated and discriminated compared to the white people or European people. So you can see, for example, in the provision of health services, the white men or European were given the high priority, and the Africans were given the less priority, whereby in provision of health services was unequal. So that was the the main aim of Africans to remove that colonial discrimination. Another was poor working conditions. It means that the Africans were influencing the poor conditions in working centers, like in agricultural centers or plantations, farms. Another was in industries or processing industries that were processing the sisal, cotton, coffee, tea, cocoa, rubber, and other industries which were established by the colonialists, processing those raw materials which were produced by the Africans. So the working conditions in those working places were poor to the Africans. So that's why they wanted to remove or to make the colonialists to improve the working conditions. So this was another reason for the rise or formation of social welfare and associations. But another was low payments. It means that the Africans were lowly paid by the colonial masters. So the Africans wanted to make the colonial masters to increase the wages for those African workers who were working in their agricultural plantations, in industries, in mining center, in transport and the communication networks. So in order to get to earn huge amount of money for their survival. Another was forced labor. It means that the colonialists was influenced or employed in forced labor, whereby the Africans were forced to work on behalf of the colonial masters. It means the Africans were forcibly or brutally forced to work for the colonial masters in the plantations, farms, industries, in construction of infrastructure like schools, like hospitals, like roads and railways. So you can see that those Africans were forced to work even without payment. So that angered the Africans to form those social welfare and associations to go against with that actions which were that were doing by the colonialists. Another was, or the last one was land alienation. It means that after the coming of colonialists, after the end of the Second World War, the colonialists employed the land alienation to the Africans. It means that the African land were taken by the colonialists in order to establish different economic activities like establishment of plantations, farms, establishment of white settlers, housing or settlement, so that those Europeans can get the enough area for their use. And you see, for example, in Kenya, the Kikuyu Islands or Kikuyu area was taken by the British settlers in order to get a large tract of land for establishment of plantations there, even in other areas. So this was another reasons of Africans to form social welfares and the associations in order to remove land alienation, because the Africans become landless and they remained on offering their labor for the colonial masters in plantations and the other working stations. So these were the 6 reasons for the rise of social welfare and the associations. So the main aim of social welfare and associations was to create a colonial government that would respect Africans' rights rather than demanding for independence. It means that the Africans, their main aim of forming those social welfares and associations was not aiming at demanding the independence, rather than making the colonialists or colonial masters to respect the African rights which were lost or which were deprived or despised or denied by those colonial masters. The following were the forms of social welfare and the associations. It means that these are examples of social welfares and associations which were formed by that time. The first one was independent churches or religious movement. It means that The first social welfare and association was independent churches. These were churches which were formed outside from the churches which were introduced by the missionaries during the colonial era. So these were churches which were made by the Africans out of churches formed by the missionaries. It means that these were churches or independent churches which were made or created out of the missionaries' churches which were introduced by the colonialist missionaries. So they opposed the European church leaders who disseminated African church leadership, and they despised African customs like polygamy and female circumcision. It means that the independent churches were created to oppose those church leaders of Europeans or colonialists who were despising the African church leaders or leaders, and they despise African customs like polygamism and female circumcision in Africa. So this was the main aim of independent churches that were formed by the Africans. Also, they opposed the land alienation, forced labor, involvement of Africans in European wars. It meant that the main or the other aims of those independent churches were to oppose the land alienation, forced labor, involvement of Africans in European wars, and the huge taxation. After looking the definition and the reasons for the formation of social welfare, as well as some of the social welfare and association which were formed, as I have told you, that was the first one was independent churches or religious movement. Let us see the examples of independent churches. The first one was Kikuyu Independent Church, formed in 1929 by David Maina in Kenya. It means that this was the example of independent church that was formed by that time. For example, Kikuyu Independent Church formed in 1929 in Kenya by David Maina. That was an example of independent church. Another was Watchtower Church and African National Churches in Tanzania. These were other churches which were formed in Tanzania. But another was Province Industrial Mission Church, formed by John Chilembwe in Malawi. This was another example. But the last, but not least, was the Religion of Spirit or Dini ya Masambwa. Another was Watchtower Church and the African National Churches in Tanzania. This was another example of independent church which was formed by the Africans. But another was the Province Industrial Mission Church, formed by the John Chilembwe in Malawi. And another, but not least, example of independent church was Religion of Spirit or Dini ya Masambwa, formed by Elijah Masinde, which opposed the colonialism and foreign religion. This independent church was in Kenya, so you can see the four. So after looking the examples of independent churches which were formed by the African leaders, let us see the contribution of those independent churches towards the African nationalism. The first contribution was they drew attention to African grievances, for example, political and social justice or rights. It means that the first contribution of those independent churches was they drew or they brought attention to African grievances, for example, in political and social grievances. For example, in political, the Africans were able to form political parties, they were able to form political associations, so this was political rights which were Africans had known by that time. But after the formation of those social welfare and the association under the independent churches, brought the political and the social rights to the Africans. But in social justice, they brought the equal or somehow distribution and the provision of social services like health service, education, water supply, electricity to the Africans. So because the independent churches brought some lessons to the European colonial masters so that they can provide somehow the services to the Africans. Another contribution was stimulated more and the courage towards fighting national independence. It means that they stimulated morale and the courage towards the fighting for African independence or national independence in African countries. For example, the Watchtower Church in Tanganyika was played a large role in uniting the Tanganyikans on how they will fight to restore the lost independence by the British colonialists. So in one way or another, the Africans gained morale and the courageous from those independent churches because they were preaching on how and which ways which will be used in demanding for the national independence. Another contribution, they helped to convey message of freedom. It means that the African independent churches were helped the African countries to convey the freedom message, especially through such what is church preaching. It means the preaching time were used that time to preach on how the freedom of African nations or African countries must be restored or must be attained by the Africans. So the message of freedom was also conveyed by those independent churches to the Africans. So that was another contribution towards the African nationalism. Another contribution, they created a unit to all Africans to fight for their rights. It means that those independent churches performed a great role in ensuring that the Africans are uniting and they demand their rights which were denied or despised by the colonial masters or colonialists. For example, the getting of equal chance in education, the provision of health services, the equal use of those social services like communication networks and the transport systems, because the Africans by that time were despised and desegregated in using those things. So after the emergence of those independent churches in Africa, we created the unit to the Africans on how they will get there and they will fight for their rights which were lost by or which was despised by the colonialists. And the last one made Africans aware of European exploitation. It means that the independent churches were made the Africans be aware about the European exploitation. For example, when the churches were preaching, the Africans were getting the lesson that the Europeans, through their domination, they are exploiting the Africans. For example, through the introduction of forced labor, taxation, the land alienation, and other stuff. So the Africans become aware on the actions or the deeds of colonialists, and that's be onto the mind of Africans that the Europeans are exploiting the Africans. So the time for demanding the lost freedom or for the lost independence, they have to fight it to restore that lost independence or freedom. In one way or another, this contribution of independent churches led to the rise of African nationalism. Therefore, the independent churches played a great role towards the struggle for African independence. So generally, those African independent churches were played a great role, as we have seen, that they drew attention, they brought unity among the Africans, they helped to convey the message of freedom, and they stimulated the moral and the courage among the Africans so that they can fight for the African independence and their dignity, which was taken by the European nations or colonialists. So after looking at the contribution, let us see the weakness or the challenges which faced the independent churches. The first one was they lacked enough funds because they depended on followers' contributions. To mean that the independent churches were lacking enough funds to learn the different activities concerning with those churches. For example, to pay those who were learning the preachings in the church, to vote the various things which were needed in decoration of the churches and the construction activities in the church. So the absence of enough funds made them to corrupt or to be not in a good level for provision of service to the Africans. Another weakness was they faced the constant competition from missionaries, followers, and the missionary leadership. To mean that those independent churches formed by the Africans was constantly opposed by the missionary followers and the missionary leaders. It means that those independent churches were highly opposed in order to be removed, so as to remove the competition towards the missionary churches. So those independent churches were experiencing the strong opposition from the missionary followers that led to them to collapse or to do their works in not the best way. But another was they faced the strong opposition from colonial government. It means that as missionary churches were under the umbrella of colonial or colonialism, so the colonial governments of respective country were assisted their missionary churches or missionary leadership to oppose those independent churches which were established by the Africans. In one way or another, those Africans were strongly opposed by the colonial government. For example, in Tanganyika, the Watchtower Church, which was established in Tanganyika, was strongly opposed by the British government, so that they can remove the spirit of freedom message to the Africans or to the Tanganyikans. So this was the main of colonial government, to ensure that those independent churches are not spreading the message of freedom or independence to the Africans. And the last weakness was they lacked the well-trained personnel to run the church effectively. To me, that as the church must have the person who have studied or have got skills and knowledge about learning the churches or religious matters, as priest, those archbishop, those pastors, so and so. These are people who are specialized and they got the skills and the knowledge about learning the religious matter or teaching. So in one way or another, the independent churches were lacking those trained personnel, because the Africans were organizing themselves without considering the qualification they have on how they will learn the churches. So these were the weakness of independent churches. After looking at the weakness, I would like to give you the exercise, and it will comprise the two questions. The first one, explain the reasons for the formation of independent churches. And the second one, which is justify that African independent church were like the uplifting tower towards the African nationalism. Justify African independent churches were like the uplifting tower toward the African nationalism. So until there, this is the end of our lesson. So thank you for listening.